blessings to you all. It's Tuesday night, which means we have a few questions have come in to be answered. So we'll endeavour to do that. First question is, Luang Por, I often have some strong dreams in my sleep. Do I need to handle it? Depends what you mean by handle it. If you mean you need to establish mindfulness and reflect with insight on your dreams, well, if you can remember them afterwards, maybe. As you're probably aware, dreams fade very quickly from our memory. Dreams occur in that state where you're half awake, half asleep. And the Buddha pointed out that there's a few different causes for dreams. One of the most common causes is just disturbance in your own body. What in Buddhism we say your dhatu and your khandhas, your elements, the physical elements of earth, air, fire and water, and your khandhas, 5 khandhas, are stirred up or disturbed, which may produce dreams as you're waking up or as you're falling asleep. Another cause is just memories of past events, particularly events that made impressions on you, strong impressions, good and bad, or pleasant and unpleasant, coming up again, kind of bubbling up into consciousness. Another cause is the influence of devas. Devas spreading metta to us or wishing us well can prompt dreams, particularly auspicious dreams, good dreams, or dreams pointing out some point of Dhamma. The last is premonitions. So sometimes people have premonitions of events that are about to take place. So these are the 4 main causes for dreams mentioned in the suttas. One thing you can reflect on if you have a dream is, well, it arises and passes away, just like thoughts and images. Say, like when you're meditating, you notice you have a lot of thoughts arise and pass away. Sometimes different images come through your mind. And they all have this one characteristic in common, is that they're impermanent. So they arise, they pass away. So you can reflect on that after the dream. But some dreams seem to be meaningful. As I said, it could be prompted, could be a premonition, could be just something in your life that's made an impression on your mind and it's coming up. So if you remember it, well, it may be possible to glean or gain some insight, some understanding from that dream. So a common one is people have dreams of some action there, either they've taken or they're about to take, and it's kind of showing them that action, whether it's wholesome or not wholesome. So whether they're going to break a precept or do something good. It's just a confirmation of what they were thinking anyway, maybe coming up again in a dream. As the Buddha said, sometimes they're warnings, so you see an event that's about to take place, good and bad. So a very common one, say people in the monastery sometimes have a dream where they see a vision of somebody who's going to come to the monastery the next day, for example. Some event may happen the next day. Sometimes people have dreams which seem to be related to dead relatives, people they know, or sometimes people they don't know. Seeing the dead in a dream, whether that can give you any insight or understanding or not depends. So you also have to remember or be prepared that your dreams may just be confusing or not seem to have any real meaning at all. And so you also have to know how to let go of dreams, not doubt about them too much or worry about them too much, because they are still what we call sankhara, just mental formations. They arise, they pass away. The Buddha himself, the night before his enlightenment, he had, if I remember, 5 auspicious dreams. In the first dream, he was lying down and his feet stretched out, covering, and his whole body covered the land of India, and his arms and legs stretched down to the oceans, through the rivers down to the oceans, and he sort of seemed to stretch out over the whole world. And then he had another dream where a piece of grass grew up through his belly button and went up into the stratosphere, kind of without end. And another dream was he was standing and all these maggots and worms were crawling up the legs. There's 3 of them, isn't it? There's 2 more. Anyone remember the other auspicious dreams of the Buddha before his enlightenment? Walking on excrement. Some people say an ocean, sometimes they say he was on top of a mountain of excrement and he was walking above excrement. Another one, I say, all these birds of different colours all flew to him and then they all turned into white coloured birds. So these 5 dreams of the Buddha, he later interpreted, they all had a meaning. So like stretching out, his body stretching out over the whole world and over the oceans was that he would become enlightened and, as it were, be able to transcend the world. And his bharami, his goodness, would encompass the whole world. I think the grass going up into the stratosphere was, again, it was pointing to his upcoming enlightenment and that he would understand the truths of suffering and the end of suffering and be able to explain this. And then the worms, the maggots coming up his legs, like all the people he would teach, be able to teach the Dhamma too. And similarly, all the birds flying to him, changing from their normal colour, multicoloured birds into white, so that he'd be able to teach people the Sila Dhamma, to be good, moral people and to practice the Dhamma. The excrement, what does the excrement stand for? Ignorance. The mind of the enlightened mind rising above ignorance. Is the Buddha rising above the excrement. Ajahn Chah also had a few dreams that he sometimes told about, and in the Buddha's life he would there'll be occasions when people had dreams, say like the King Pasenadi had a dream with 16 different events happened which came to the Buddha because he was worried that his kingdom was going to collapse and there'd be disasters, but the Buddha pointed out these 16 events were pointing more to the future, the distant future, when the Dhamma disappeared from the world. So dreams can seem to be significant and give us some understanding, but you have to have enough insight to gain that understanding, and if they just seem meaningless or confusing, we'll just let them go. Don't worry about them. So another question. Dear Lumpur, I hope all is well. What are the pitfalls of not doing body contemplation practice? either the 32 parts or the 4 body elements. What are the pitfalls? Sound like a student checking whether, if they don't do their homework, how much trouble will they get in? The pitfalls are, if you don't contemplate the body and see it as impermanent, not self, as unattractive, well, then you're most likely to remain fully attached to your body, identify with your body as self, as something desirable, as a source of happiness, as something permanent. And this is a great cause of suffering and stress for human beings, the strong identification with the body. So it's an essential part of the practice. Firstly, just to help overcome the immediate hindrance to developing states of samadhi and calm, because a huge hindrance is sensual desire based on attachment to the body and the pleasure we can have through the body, and that includes attachment to an identification with your eyes, seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, as well as just the general beauty and desirability of the body. We need to contemplate that to see the impermanence in that and to see the unattractive nature of the body, which is why these meditations were developed. They form part of the first foundation of mindfulness. So it's actually an essential part of mindfulness practice, which is often overlooked or played down because it's not always very easy to do. But the Buddha encouraged us to contemplate the body, to be mindful of the posture, mindful of the 32 parts, so to analyze the body and break it down into its different 32 parts: hair of the head, hair of the body, nails, teeth, skin, bones, bone marrow, flesh, the different organs, the blood, the urine, and so on, all these different parts. And that naturally moves on to contemplating and analysing the body into its 4 basic elements, which are the building blocks of the whole universe, not just our own body, but other people's bodies and the world around us. Because it's a great doorway into developing insight into not self. The earth element is not self, the water element is not self, and when you see these elements in your body, then that perception of not self becomes very strong. So it actually can bring great peace, steadiness of mind, stillness of samadhi, as well as developing insight into these 3 characteristics. So really it is an essential part of the practice, even though it's difficult. The next part of the question goes on, I'm now focusing on recognizing the impermanence of phenomena on both mental and physical plane. I try as much as possible to carry that through outside of formal meditation too, and find this very useful. As I'm beginning to see some mental aggregates as separate heaps during the meditation, I notice that body contemplation isn't something I naturally gravitate to or like doing. So I was wondering if body contemplation practice is essential for all, or if it's more important for some people with certain temperaments. Well, I think because it is part of the first foundation of mindfulness, the Buddha is telling us that it is essential for everyone. But as you say, it's not easy to do. It's not an immediately attractive practice, and it's going against not only our own accumulated desire and attachment for the body, but also all the cultural conditioning of society, which is very much a sense-based and sensual society. So, every day we're encountering different conditions and experiences and sense objects that promote sensuality and beauty, and we hold beauty up as important, and we sell things with beauty by using beauty, models and beautiful houses, beautiful people to sell products. We aspire to that. We give a lot of value to beauty in our society, and that's something that's conditioning us all the time. And then our own attachment to this body and our own obsession with the body, making it look nice, smell nice, feel good. It's a huge part of human existence. So there's no way around it. We do have to start to investigate this, confront this, in order to establish more mindfulness rather than just follow the habits of desiring, whether it's sexual desire or just the attachment to beauty and the seeking of beauty. And it brings so much suffering, doesn't it? When you see a blemish on your body, you're not happy. When you see a blemish on someone else's body, you don't like it. We avoid seeing the ugly sides of physical form in ourselves, in others, in the world around us. And we are attracted to beauty and seek out beauty all the time. So it's a huge part of our conditioning, and it's something to become mindful of. But because it is such a deeply ingrained attachment, we have to go gently, we have to be realistic. It's not necessarily something that we can do for very long when we practice it as a meditation. So usually teachers encourage to practice contemplating the body, and particularly the unattractiveness of the body, for maybe just 15 minutes at a time, just as an exercise to become more used to contemplating, analysing the body down into its 32 parts, 4 elements, and even developing the corpse meditations, seeing yourself as a corpse, seeing someone else as a corpse. In society this is not valued or promoted. You're even criticised if you talk about it or do it. And you can see in our society we parcel away and package and wrap up and clean away anything that's dirty. You have a trash can, you don't want to see trash, so you put the lid on it, you put things in bags, you get people to take your trash away and hide it in landfill. You have a toilet, but you shut the door and then you flush the excrement and the urine away, and you don't want to see it or smell it. We're always cleaning ourselves to get rid of dirt, grease, sweat. We're always trying to make ourselves look good, and we wear clothes, and the clothes tend to be, clothes that look good, fashionable, designed well. And on it goes. And we have very little exposure to, say, sick people or dead people. Sick people go to hospital and are hidden away in hospital until they're better again, and then they'll come out and you'll see them. Dead people are whisked away when people die in hospital or in other situations. The body's covered up. We don't see the body. It's whisked away, put in a coffin. And even if you do have a viewing of a dead body, it tends to be after the mortician has beautified the body, made it look good again, and so on. This is our habit as human beings. We shy away from the unattractive, ugly side of the human body and just life in general. But it's something we should become mindful of and direct our mind to contemplate, investigate, until we can see the truth. And mindfulness isn't becoming obsessed with the unattractive, it's simply recognizing that there is beauty, there is ugliness, there is the attractive, the unattractive. There's two sides of things, and mindfulness is just opening up and being aware, witnessing that, without aversion or delight. That's the aim, is to develop equanimity. A small number of people can do this quite naturally. Maybe they've done it in previous lives, so they start to meditate, and maybe quite naturally they have visions of their own body or corpses, or this kind of thing can arise. Venerable Yasa in the time of the Buddha, because he had studied corpses in a previous life, when he first became sort of spiritually awakened and went to see the Buddha, he was having a lot of images of dead bodies. but in a spiritual way, not in a kind of gross, morose way, making him depressed. It was just giving him insight into impermanence. Or many Buddhist monks and nuns who have maybe practiced meditation for many lives, they quite naturally will have what we call asupa nimittas, visions of the unattractive parts of the body or of corpses arise when their mind's peaceful. Like the Buddhist nun Meiji Gao, when she was only 16 and meditated and had entered a state of samadhi for the first time, she saw herself as a corpse. A very clear, powerful image. And one has to be careful because such images can be confronting and they're quite hard to deal with sometimes. So one has to go gently and also balance that investigation of the body and the impermanence of the body with other more joyful meditations or meditations that bring a sense of calm, well-being, such as mindfulness of breathing or the development of Brahmavihara meditation and so on. And it's something one has to go at gently. If you're not used to it, you go at it slowly, gently, in small bursts, and then you develop meditations on other subjects that bring you more joy and make you feel better. And you practice dana and sila and other aspects of the Dhamma practice to help bring your mind to this sense of peace and well-being, so that when you do mindfulness of the body, when you practice that, your mind can accept it and doesn't go into aversion or depression. So it's a very valuable practice, but also a challenging one, a difficult one, and you just have to go at your own pace, whatever pace your mind will allow. The ones who take to it naturally, some monks I know, they just sit down and they start contemplating the body. Their mind becomes very peaceful, happy, contemplating the body. So also bear that in mind. When mindfulness is strong, the mind is calm in samadhi and it's clear, sometimes contemplating the body makes the mind very happy, very detached, joyous. So when it's working, it doesn't make you feel depressed or angry. Dear Ajahn, thank you very much for teaching us the Dhamma. When we chant the evening chanting, what does it mean that the Dhamma is divided into path and fruit, learning and liberation? Thank you again. May you be well and happy. Thank you. Path and fruit, it's Pali terms of magga and phala. So the path is the Noble Eightfold Path, which one cultivates on ever deepening levels, on more profound levels, in more, one becomes more and more devoted to cultivating the 8 factors of the Noble Path, until they're all arising in one's consciousness all at the same time. And that's when they give rise to fruit, phala. But fruit is even on different levels. So the initial fruit is stream entry, entering the stream where one has deep insight into impermanence and abandons what we call sakkaya ditthi, self-view, seeing this body and mind as a self, as that belief, that view that it's a self. And the second stage of enlightenment, where the factors of the path again are coalescing and gelling even more than before. One's mindfulness is more refined, one's insight is deeper and subtler and clearer. Then one abandons the coarsest aspects of greed and anger, and that's one attains the fruit of once returner, sakadagami. And as one continues to practice, and particularly doing that body contemplation we're just talking about just now, on an ever more deeper level, to the point where one attains deep states of samadhi and deep profound insight, one abandons all attachment to the body, to physical pain, pleasure and pain, and attains the fruit of non-returner, anagami. So if one dies as a non-returner, one doesn't return as a human being for another birth. One is reborn in a Brahma realm and attains Nibbana from that Brahma realm. And the fourth fruit is Arahatapala, fruit of enlightenment or Nibbana. And again, no more birth in any realm, as a Brahma, as a human, any realm. And that's the point of the whole practice. One is getting out of samsara, the round of birth and death. Learning and liberation, well, it's another way of describing what we're doing in the practice. Pariyati is learning, study, so an important factor in progress in the practice of Dhamma is we have to be able to listen to the good Dhamma from an experienced teacher, or read it, or listen to it. And then we have to internalize it and develop wise reflection for ourselves. So develop that ability to contemplate and understand and reflect on the Dhamma ourselves. This is all what we call pariyati, or the study and the learning of the Dhamma, which supports the patibhati, the practice of Dhamma, so the undertaking to keep precepts, 5, 8, or 227 precepts, cultivating 4 foundations of mindfulness, cultivating the different aspects of the path, developing samadhi, and then developing insight into the way things are. This is what we call practice, and ultimately leads to liberation, pativaita, liberation from our attachment to the world through this body and mind, attaching to body and mind as self. Liberation from what we call the 10 fetters. The first was Sakkaya Ditthi, which I mentioned, but there's 10 fetters which bind the mind to existence, to rebirth. So these are just like summaries as we reflect on the qualities of the Dhamma. They're just brief summaries to remind us what we're doing, but of course these can be expanded out through study, learning, and in practice we can expand on these simple descriptions of the Dhamma. Another question. Ajahn, what is the vibhaka karma of those who always verbally abuse, complain, lie, blame, and attack others all the time? Bad speech. I guess you could summarize that as, what is the vibhaka karma? Vibhaka means resultant. Karma means action, intentional action. Vibhaka means the result of intentional action through body, speech and mind. So body, physical action, speech, verbal action, mind, intentional thought and mental states that we identify with. So if you're always verbally abusing and complaining and blaming and attacking others, well, on the level of the mind, it's not going to make your mind feel peaceful and happy. It's going to agitate you and bring a lot of negativity and unhappiness mentally, and that will be immediate. You don't have to wait for next life to kind of prove it. Just observe yourself when you have just been rude or insulting to someone, or said a lot of negative things. Observe your mind if you can. As soon as you can, establish mindfulness, reflect. How do you feel? And you won't feel good. And then of course there's the external results. The person who hears your speech will not be happy. They'll probably turn you into an enemy, and they may argue with you or abuse you right back, or mark you down as somebody they don't like, so then that will start to affect their behavior towards you. Maybe physically they go for you as well. You abuse someone, if they're frustrated with you and they're not happy with what you said, maybe they come and physically attack you as well. You become their enemy. So these are all the immediate kinds of karmas that might pop up as a result. But then you've got the long term as well. So in the long term, some of this will come back to you with people doing exactly what you've done to them, whether it's the same people or a different set of people, it doesn't matter, but you'll get other people abusing you and complaining about you and blaming you and attacking you. And sometimes we ask, don't we? We say, why is this person being so abusive to me and giving me such a hard time when I've done nothing to them? And you have to pause and say, well, maybe I did do something either to them or to someone else at a previous time. Maybe you can't remember, but think it through. Maybe you can remember if you really establish mindfulness and think back in your life. There may be times when you've said exactly those same kind of words. So that will be one kind of karma. It comes back on you. What you've said out and put out in the world is going to come back on you later on. And it can even travel from life to life. So, in a future life, you're just sitting there minding your own business and someone comes along and starts abusing you, giving you a hard time. And maybe that's come through from a past life. Who you abuse will also have an impact, won't it? Karma is a very refined thing. It's not a simple black and white, I abuse you, this comes back to me. Who you abuse, if you abuse somebody in a position of power, well, maybe they'll use their power to get you. You abuse a rich person, maybe they'll sue you or try and use their power, their money to get at you more than someone else. If you abuse a very pure person, someone with good sila, like a Buddha or an Arahant or a well-practiced layperson even, if you abuse or insult someone who's well-practiced with sila, the karma is often heavier because it's totally out of proportion, isn't it? You're rude to someone like that. Maybe when you finally realize what you've done, you feel very unhappy with yourself, a lot of regret, guilt. Or even if you don't realize what you've done, still it can be very agitating on the mind because of the purity of that person that you've verbally abused. The strength of your intention will also have an effect. You can casually be rude to someone, or you can be intensely angry and sustain abuse over many occasions. And it's going to have different karmic consequences. So there's all these factors to think about, but it's really just cause and effect, and you have to start looking at the cause, meaning your intention, what you've said, what you've done, how strong it was, how often it was, and then look at the result for yourself. You're reinforcing the tendency to further abuse and speak in those ways, and then you're going to affect and hurt other people. They're going to not like you, and the more you do it, the more they're not going to like you. So there's these different factors to look at when you're looking at the kind of resultant karma of this behavior. Similarly, good speech, right speech, what we call beautiful speech, biyawaja, has its good consequences, good karmic consequences. What is biyawaja? Speech that is spoken at the right time, speech that is true, speech that is gentle on the ear, speech that is useful, productive and helpful, speech that is coming from an intention with metta, goodwill. This is what we call good speech, or biyawaja. Will have the complete opposite effect. It will tend to have a good effect on other people who hear this speech. They'll like you, they'll be happy with you. It may help them to learn something or understand something better. It'll be productive. You will feel better in yourself if you say something that's truthful from a place of kindness. Your mind is going to be bright, happier than if you're coming from anger or abusing someone. So the short-term and long-term consequences of good speech are going to be totally opposite of bad speech. And this is something just to keep reflecting on, to give you the motivation to be more mindful and train yourself away from lying, abusive speech, towards more fruitful, positive speech. I often tell the story of the poor lady who lived in my street when I was a kid, kind of granny who was always complaining. She must have had some real suffering in her life. And she would always come out of her house. I was always with a group of kids, my friends. We'd be playing soccer or just doing something in the street. And every time she saw us, or other people, not just us, she'd always be really rude, aggressive, insult us. But we got to know her, so we didn't take it too seriously. But at the same time, it kind of distressed us because we thought, this lady, her face was always really screwed up with anger. She's always saying really nasty things. She didn't seem to have any happiness. So even as little kids, and we weren't Buddhist or anything, but we just felt sorry for her. We were like, wow, how can someone be so unhappy and say so many nasty things without reason, without cause? So I guess that was our vibhaka karma from the past. We must have said things to people because she was saying to us. But we could see it was a sign of her own suffering. In her face, I just remember her face was always so full of suffering, so unhappy. Some follow-up questions, Ajahn. 1. Not harming our parents. Every time when I visit my parents, I bring them some food and drink, including beer for my dad. My dad needs sleeping pills and beer or wine together every single night to put himself to sleep. If I don't buy beer for him, he buys that for himself. So I'm wondering, my action of offering Father alcohol, is it harming or supporting him? Well, I realize you may have a good intention to help, give your father what he wants, but the Buddha pointed out alcohol is not a good gift. It's not a skillful gift because it helps intoxicate people, destroys their brain cells, doesn't help their health. So if you can think of a better thing to do or give him that will achieve the same end. If he has trouble sleeping, well, okay, if he has to take sleeping pills, maybe get whatever the doctor suggests. Go with the doctor is probably the best, I would say. Go to your GP or his GP and see what pills are the best to help him sleep. And you'll probably find the beer and the wine is more of a habit and indulgence than a real necessity. So perhaps try not to offer that and maybe even encourage him to change his ways. I'm sure his health would improve. It may not be an easy task, but just do your best. Sometimes even the stubbornest habit can be broken. You have to work at it. It's not a good example for others either, buying alcohol for your dad. Other people see it, maybe they'll imitate it as well. So I would recommend not doing that if you can. Try and find other means to help your father sleep. Help him to relax. If you can get him to meditate, that would be best of all. Meditate and relax his mind before he sleeps. Sit there, read him stories, whatever will work to help him sleep without the alcohol. That would be my suggestion. Maybe a long-term project. You might not be able to achieve it quickly, but why not? See what you can do to help him. Another question. You mentioned a dog at Wat Mapjan that could see ghosts and would bark at them. Are there many wandering ghosts in forest monasteries or devas? Now, generally in monasteries where people do a lot of good, they offer dana, keep precepts and meditate, the ghosts benefit from that. They receive a lot of merit, so they get reborn in better places. So they disappear from a forest and the devas move in. The devas are attracted where people do good. It's particularly monasteries, so then you tend to get a change. Maybe a monastery, the forest to begin with is an unpopulated, uninhabited forest, so it may have beings there. Some of them may be ghosts, but through the goodness of the practice, it will be devas who come to live there, and the ghosts get reborn elsewhere. That seems to happen everywhere that I've lived and that I know about. It seems to be a general kind of occurrence. As far as dogs go, well, they just have that sixth sense, don't they? So sometimes they see things we don't. So I think you're referring to a story I once said that there was a tree at the front of what Mapjan, that the dog was always barking at. Eventually someone did see a white figure. It wasn't a ghost, it was a deva, a tree-dwelling deva would live in that tree, and the dog would go and bark at it. And then somebody or a few people would actually see the deva there, and then they realised why the dog would bark. So sometimes dogs are quick off the mark because of their ESP, and sometimes they see things that we don't. Another question. Sometimes we read some sorts of Dhamma teachings online that says such as, today is Vesak day, so whatever good or bad you do will result in the good or bad karma 1 trillion times. When I read such words, I have doubt about the accuracy. Is this counted as wrong Dhamma to be spread about? Or shouldn't be spread about if it's wrong Dhamma. Well, who's to say that what you do is going to result in good or bad karma 1 trillion times? And it's not the words of the Buddha, so we shouldn't be spreading about not the words of the Buddha. The internet is no guarantee of truth. You know, there's a lot of untrue, ridiculous stuff on the internet. And it's not just Vesak, is it? Any day of the year you do bad things, it will result in bad karma. You do good things, it will result in good karma. It will bring good results. And then, you know, the basis of the Buddhist teaching is founded on the teaching of karma, action, intentional action, good intention, good result, bad intention, bad result. And this is how we practice and develop ourselves based on this principle. I understand perhaps people are kind of hyped up when it's the Buddha's birthday or Enlightenment Day, so they say, you know, your karma is going to be supercharged today, the good you do will be extra good, the bad you do will be extra bad. But you know, if you're disrespectful or insulting to the Buddha Dhamma Sangha, any day it's bad, very bad. Don't do it. Try not to. And if you make good karma, any day it's good. Do it. So perhaps the intention behind these things, who knows what the intention is behind the one who prints these kind of comments, whether they're just seeking attention or they think it's genuinely true or they're deluded. We can't be sure. So you have to develop a wise attitude towards things you read on the internet. If there's something you read that seems meaningful, useful, wise, well, that may be helpful and it can be used for that purpose. But if it turns out it's very unwise or makes no sense or it's just plain rubbish or untrue, well, you have to be ready to recognize that, let it go. And that's the kind of the challenge of the internet, is that it's increasing our workload. It's already hard enough just talking to the people around you and interacting with the people around you, sifting through their wholesome and unwholesome karma as well as your own. And then you've got the internet, so you're now exposed to the whole world, the views and opinions and the karma of the whole world. So there's a lot of work to do. So sometimes you need to be very discerning and limit what you read, or choose the websites you go to, the sources of information you receive. You may have to be discerning so as not to overwhelm yourself with a mass of foolish information. Last question today. Did Ananda and the Buddha have the same father? I.e., did the Buddha's father remarry his sister-in-law? From what I remember, Ananda and the Buddha didn't have the same father. Their fathers were brothers. So Suddhodana was the Buddha's father. Ananda's father was called Sukkotana. Very similar names, which is probably where this question has come from. They had very similar names, but they were brothers. I think it was 5 or 6 siblings. So Ananda was the Buddha's cousin. So he certainly would have been brought up, and apparently they were born on the same day. So you can imagine the karma very close. They were cousins. They probably brought up and met each other often. But they did actually, they weren't brothers, they were cousins. But as you know, Venerable Ananda became a very distinguished monk in the time of the Buddha. He became called the Buddha's upatak, the attendant monk for the Buddha, and he, they say, became the best attendant monk. He was, foremost. He was really good at it. Very devoted, very dedicated to serving the Buddha, helping the Buddha. And he had many other qualities, like he had very good mindfulness, from the good mindfulness he had a very good memory, so he would remember all the Dhamma talks the Buddha gave, which is where our Tripitaka, our suttas come from. They were recited by Ananda at the first council. So he had great memory, great mindfulness. He was a great servant, attendant for the Buddha. On the night after the Buddha passed away, the night before the first council, Ananda was preparing. He had this great responsibility to recite and inform the remaining Sangha of what the Buddha had taught, all the suttas, all the teachings. So when the Buddha passed away, he said, there won't be one person who becomes your teacher. The Dhamma and the Vinaya will become your teacher. So they needed to hear what the Dhamma and Vinaya was from a reliable source, and Ananda was the most reliable source. But they had a condition that only arahants could join this council, this meeting of all the leading monks after the Buddha died. And he wasn't an arahant, he was a sotapanna, the first stage of enlightenment. So he was going to be barred from joining this council, and so he wouldn't be able to perform this duty. So he made tremendous effort to become enlightened before the day of the meeting. And the very last night he still wasn't enlightened, wasn't an arahant. And so just before dawn, having meditated, sitting, walking meditation all night, with despair he went to lie down thinking, that's it, I failed. This is so embarrassing and such a disappointment. I'm not going to be able to recite the suttas for the whole community to hear. And so he was lying down, and they said before his head reached the pillow, so he was half up, half down, his mind converged and he became fully enlightened, attained Nibbana. So luckily he was able to join everyone in the council. And the sort of side note to this is, well, you can get enlightened when you're standing, when you're lying down, when you're sitting, or when you're halfway between sitting and lying down. It's still possible to become enlightened before your head reaches the pillow. And probably that is a good position to get enlightened, because if your head reaches the pillow, you'll probably just go to sleep and not practice anymore. As Ajahn Mahabua used to say, most practitioners love their pillow more than the Buddha. So that's why they're not enlightened yet. So that ends tonight's questions and answer session. Hopefully there's something in there for everybody. We wish you well with your practice, and we'll see you again next time.